Hey guys, today I'm sharing the good, bad, and ugly of this dresser makeover that I did when I tested out the Homeright paint sprayer. I went back to my roots and used homemade chalk paint. I made my share of mistakes, and I had some bleed-through issues that I had to fix. So let's dive in. This is what the dresser looked like before. We bought it from Facebook Marketplace for $50, which is a steal in my area. First things first, we did all of the boring prep work. We removed the hardware, cleaned off the dresser, and filled in the old hardware holes. I recently did a video comparing the most popular ways to fill in hardware holes. I thought it was super interesting to see the different methods side by side and which one really works better. So I'll link it in the comments for you. The top had a lot of scratches, so I decided to sand it down and get all of those scratches out of it. I started with 100 grit sandpaper on my orbital sander to eat through the finish fast. I did really good and didn't sand through the thin veneer at all on the top. But when I got to the sides, all of my luck was gone. I blew through that thin veneer in a few spots. I honestly probably shouldn't have used such a coarse grit on the sides. Or I should have probably stuck to what I do best and strip it down with a chemical stripper, so I didn't have much of a chance to sand through the veneer. But you live and you learn, right? Anyway, so I continued sanding, and I did the whole move through the different grits of sandpaper until you get to where you want it to be. So I sanded everything with 150 grit. And then I hand sanded with 220 grit to smooth it out a little bit more for paint. Then, since the sander was out, I sanded the filler in the hardware holes down so it was flush. And I took a minute or two to lightly sand the rest of the dresser surface with 220 grit sandpaper. Since this dresser was pretty flat, I was able to use the orbital for most of the scuff sanding. Then my husband vacuumed out the inside of the dresser. And I glued the drawer back together that was falling apart. The next day, with the repair done and the drawers all taped off, I sprayed clear shellac all over the dresser. Have you used this stuff to block stains on your painted furniture? If so, hit that like button or leave a comment. I would love to know. If you're wondering what in the world I'm talking about, hi, welcome to my videos. I like to use clear shellac to block stains from showing up in my painted finish. It also makes paint stick really well, which is weird because it's mostly known as a top coat. Someone out there, please explain why it makes paint stick so well to even really slick surfaces. I don't know why it does or what it does. I just know that it works. And I love the spray can version because it's so easy to spray on. It does stink a lot though. That is its biggest downside. Anyway, I sprayed 2 really good coats of clear shellac all over the dresser, letting it dry for at least an hour between coats, and then overnight before painting. And then the next day, I made some homemade chalk paint to spray onto the dresser. I used the color Almond Wisp from Bear. I personally really like the recipe that uses 1 cup flat latex paint and 5 tablespoons of food-grade calcium carbonate powder. I mixed together a little bit of water, maybe a tablespoon or 2 of water, and the calcium carbonate powder. Then I put that mixture into the flat latex paint and mix it together really well. Homemade chalk paint is a super cheap alternative to regular chalk paint. You can mix it with any color or brand of flat latex paint, and it sticks really well. I'm curious though, have you made homemade chalk paint before? Then I sprayed the homemade chalk paint onto the dresser. I'll link the Homeright review video that shows how I thinned the paint, the settings I used, and all the tips you need to know when using the Homeright paint sprayer in the comments. After the first coat was dry, I noticed a lot more scratches that should have been filled or sanded, and I even noticed a slight paint drip. Since I sanded the top down to bare wood, there was a lot of wood grain that needed filled in on the top too. So I took a break from painting the next coat and worked on covering those things up. I filled the wood grain on the top and filled in the scratches and blemishes everywhere else. When those things were dry, I sanded them all down flush and even sanded out the paint drip. Then I cleaned up my mess. And then I sprayed more clear shellac over those repairs. I know from past experience that filling in wood grain tends to bring out bleed-through issues, so I didn't want to give it any chance to give me issues. The next day, I sprayed another coat of paint all over the dresser. Actually, I think I ended up with 3 coats of paint on this dresser by this point. This paint dries so fast though, so the painting part didn't actually take long at all. Everything else was taking forever though. So after that last coat of paint was dry, I lightly sanded the dresser with 400 grit sandpaper to make the paint finish feel smoother. Then I sprayed a coat of water-based poly onto the dresser. After the poly's dry, I like to sand it lightly with 400 grit sandpaper again to make it feel really smooth again. And that's when I found a few bleed-through stains coming through on one drawer. It was nowhere else, just on the one drawer. This is such a common thing. You don't see any stains coming through the paint and think you're almost done, and then once you put your top coat on, the stains show up. It is so annoying. Basically, you've got to start over, and that's why I don't chance it and I prime to begin with. But every once in a while, there's a piece that still gives you trouble after you prime. Thankfully, it was just on one drawer, so I pulled the drawer aside and I sprayed it with a couple of coats of clear shellac. And then I let it dry overnight. Then the next day, I just wiped on some paint all over that one drawer because I didn't want to get my sprayer dirty for such a small area. After the 2 coats of paint were dry, I sprayed that dresser again with Topcoat, so I ended up with 3 coats of Topcoat on all of it. Did you keep track of how many coats of everything that I used? Alright, before I share what it looks like now, please take a second to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really helps get my videos out to more people, so thank you so much. So here's what it looked like before. And here's what it looks like now. I had such a hard time deciding on what hardware to put on this piece. These knobs weren't my first choice, but because of how the drawers are, I couldn't use my first choice. I love these knobs though, so I think it worked out in the end. Anyway, what do you think?